Today's headphone is one that I recently bought and added to my collection. Let's check it out. This is the Focal Radiance. There's a lot of headphones that get sent in from various companies that I get to review, but this is one that I bought on HeadFi. I've had it for a while and I wanted to get this video out to share my thoughts. But first, a word from today's sponsor. Today, the sponsor of our video is Tidal. You've probably heard of them before because I've been using their service for years. And the main reason I use their service, sure, I care about audio quality, and yeah, it's nice that now they offer FLAC streaming in the hi-fi tier, but the reason I use their service is because I like supporting artists, but I also like convenience and streaming. Users of the Hi-Fi Plus tier can tell where their money is going because 10% of their monthly subscription cost goes directly to the artists they listen to the most. So every month you listen to an artist a lot, that artist gets a cut of your subscription. And you can actually go back in the app and see who that's gone to. I'm a really big fan of that, and Tidal already pays artists a lot better than most other services do. They have a massive 80 million plus song catalog. They're ad-free, you can download your music and videos for offline listening. And now they offer FLAC streaming at 1,411 kilobits a second. And the best part is they're doing a special. I have a link in the video description. If you click that, you can get 3 months of Hi-Fi for $1 or 3 months of Hi-Fi Plus for $2. $2. That's a pretty good deal if you ask me. Thank you, Tidal, for helping to support the creative audiophile community and helping support artists. Let's get into the review. This is the Focal Radiance. Interestingly enough, this is a headphone that was a collab between Focal and Bentley, not something that you see every day. It's a closed back, it has a lot of leather on it. Interestingly enough, the closed cups have leather right here behind this metal grill. Really interesting look. It's a dynamic headphone, and for the most part, its construction, aside from the styling, is very similar to a lot of other Focals, things like the Allegia, Celeste. In a lot of ways, this reminds me of the Celeste in both build and sound, but there are definitely some key differences. Build is overall pretty good. Isolation is way up there. I definitely find this more isolating than things like my DCA headphones like the Aeon Noir, which I love so much. It traps sound out and traps sound in. So there really isn't much leak even when I'm listening pretty loud. Terminations on the bottom, like pretty much every other Focal, are dual 3.5mm. And the cable that comes with it is, like many Focals, a pile of garbage. Sorry, it is what it is. I don't know why Focal insists on having these super thick, really high memory cables that just bend into weird shapes and you can never get them undone. They just sort of stay like that for ages. You have to hang them with like a weight from the ceiling and stretch them out and eventually they'll lay flat, but they just curl in every way you don't want them to. Comfort for me personally is fantastic. Focals have always fit my head pretty well. This is no exception. I can wear this headphone all day, no problems at all. It does get kind of warm after a while. Not as much of a problem up here in chilly Buffalo, but if anyone's ever worn a leather jacket in the summer in Florida, well, you know this probably isn't something you're gonna wanna wear in hot, sunny weather, unless you fancy air conditioning. I don't think anyone's gonna be wearing these outside on a jog or anything like that anyway. I mean, if you do, like, more power to you. It is a closed back after all. But this is probably something you're gonna use in a home or an office or just somewhere where you want closed back, quiet listening. And with that said, let's talk about the sound. I'm gonna do subjective sound first, objective sound and graphs, we'll get to that second, then we'll wrap up with amplification. So how does this sound? Well, this sounds a lot like the Focal Celeste, but a little bit more to my taste. It's like if you took the Focal Celeste, which is a very good measuring, very neutral headphone, and just gave it a little bit of extra spice, tuned it for flavor, you get the Radiance. If you're not familiar with the Celeste, well, it was an interesting headphone. Pretty good, actually. I compared it a lot to things like my Aeon Noir, though in the end, I ended up picking the Noir over the Celeste. But I still went out of my way to buy a Focal Radiance. You know what, we might as well compare these two a little bit while we're doing this video. The Radiance is punchy. It's got a lot of sub bass, but not overwhelmingly so. It's not muddy. It's not as tight as a planar like the Aeon Noir, and in some cases, I would dare to call it tubby. But the Radiance has a round smoothness to the bass that I really enjoy with the dynamics of, well, a dynamic driver. I get a lot more dynamics out of the entire frequency range of this than I do with my DCA Noir, though at the trade-off of a bit less neutrality. The Radiance has a great mid-range, though the upper mid-range does get a little bit shouty, I found, with certain tones, especially with isolated piano. Not enough for it to be a deal breaker, but it does encroach upon that territory at times. Luckily, I never ever encounter sibilance on this headphone because it ends up that the upper treble sort of dips in a little bit. Well, maybe more than just a little bit. This headphone is warmer leaning and more bass leaning, and the farther you get into the treble, the more it sort of starts to taper off. Not to a fault to where it sounds extremely dark, but to the point where the top end sounds very smooth, very forgiving, very relaxing, very comfortable. Yet at the same time, we have the bass impact that, well, can be aggressive. What we're left with is a tonality, a sound that is non-fatiguing. It's very easy to listen to for a long time. It's very fun, it's engaging, it's exciting. But it's not sparkly, doesn't show off the air, and still retains that detail in the highs. Things like the plucks of acoustic guitars and the resonance of strings that normally would just be reserved for airy frequency ranges still come through pretty clearly despite those frequencies being a little bit recessed. It's a sound that not everyone is going to love, but a sound that I needed to have in my collection. Vocals in particular are a thing that stood out for me on this headphone. Not because of their intimacy, but rather because of their lack of intimacy yet still retained clarity, which is exactly how it sounds. Vocals are roomy, they're spaced out a little bit off the head, more so than my DCA Noir, but the clarity is fantastic. In many cases, when you think of a lack of vocal intimacy, you think of vocals being distant. And while there is a distance that puts these out of that center of your head sound, the clarity is retained as if the vocals were right there. And the timbre works pretty well for some things. I definitely like the sound of chamber and classical music on these, though the timbre of pianos is just a little bit lacking in my taste. For many other things though, it's great, especially with guitars. And real quick, let's compare across the board to my Noir. Well, the Noir versus the Radiance, the Noir takes the cake on neutrality, it takes the cake on speed. It's a planar, what do you expect? But on the other end, the Radiance, well, it's a bit more relaxing, it's a bit less fatiguing, and it definitely wins on dynamics. So really between these two, it would depend on what your preferences are. And also, the Noir is harder to drive. The Radiance you could drive almost off of a cell phone. And I found the Radiance to have a bit more inner diameter cup space, despite the pads being a little bit less vertically tall. All in all, Radiance is a good headphone. It's not perfect, it's not going to completely blow your mind and destroy everything else that's ever been on the market, but if you have a collection of high-end, well, I think this fits right in. Let's talk about objective sound, and I'll show you guys some frequency response. Now I think it's pretty obvious looking at this that the Radiance was aimed at the Harman target. This is the Harman target 2018 in green, the raw response of the Radiance with a little bit of smoothing in blue, and then the compensated response in red. Basically, if that red line was flat, then it would be perfectly flat to the target. Now you don't want perfect target adherence, you want some variation because our ears all vary quite a bit over 4 kilohertz. My ears and your ears are gonna be completely different. But really, looking at this graph, it sounds pretty much exactly like I described. We've got some pretty powerful bass, we've got nice mid-range, and treble that is a bit recessed in some areas, inoffensive, and not sibilant. Objectively, I would say this is a pretty good headphone. Probably not something that I would spend my time mixing on, but definitely something that I'd love to listen to and do love listening to in my free time. If you are mainly an objectivist and being right in line with the Harman target is more of your primary goal, then the Aeon Noir is going to be more to your tastes. And lastly, let's talk about amplification. I enjoyed this a lot on the FiiO K9 Pro, but I don't think that an amplifier of that price is necessary to bring this headphone to its maximum potential. I think it sounded fantastic on the Element 3, and it sounded pretty dang decent on just a cell phone with a good headphone jack, to be honest, or even a current generation MacBook Pro. If you are listening to this with Dolby Atmos, I think that it has pretty wild amounts of space. If your amplifier that you're using this with or device you're using it with is Dolby Atmos compatible, try it out because it actually pairs really well with the frequency response of this headphone. But all in all, I think the DAC quality is going to matter way more than the amplifier's power rating for this headphone. It takes hardly any power to drive, and if you have a good DAC, it's going to sing. So there you go, Focal Radiance. I hope you liked this video. Thank you again, Tidal, for making this video possible and helping to support the channel and artists. Once again, they're having a special, $1 for 3 months of Hi-Fi, $2 for 3 months of Hi-Fi Plus. Like I said, you get to see who your subscription is going to, what artists you're directly supporting. They have a massive library, high quality streaming, and you can check out this deal at the link in the video description. That is going to wrap up today's video, guys. If you liked it, please leave a like down below, a comment letting me know what you want to see in the future. If you want to get active in the community, you can at forum.hifiguides.com. And as always, don't forget to stick around, subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Till the next one, guys. Peace.